This podcast has bad words.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
Today we're going to talk about consciousness. We're going to talk about the mysteries of the brain. We're going to talk about decluttering our minds with today's guest. Annaka Harris is here. She's the author.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here.
She's the author of the new book, Conscious, A Brief Guide to the Fundamental Mystery of the Mind. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll hold it up here.
I love that cover, by the way.
Thanks, yeah.
Tell me, did you design that, or was that...
Gemma O'Brien is the brilliant artist who did these illustrations, and I was very lucky to be able to work with her. But I knew that the cover was going to be important for this. I really wanted this to be an accessible book on a topic that is largely confined to academic circles, and so I knew the artwork on the cover would matter, and she totally nailed it.
Well, it turns out with this book, you can judge a book by its cover, and it's an amazing cover, and it's an amazing book.
I joked a lot with Gemma that her cover was going to raise the expectations too high. That it was perfect. The reader could only be disappointed after that cover. But.
No, what possesses someone to write a book about consciousness? I mean, what is next? Like quantum physics? I mean, and by the way, turning it into something that is like, there's a certain amount of brevity here, and it's succinct, but it's also, it's palatable, because like, as you said, it's generally a topic that is just argued about within academia, and 13 people might read a book about that.
Yeah.
But you've written something that is accessible, but it also left me walking away with more questions than answers, but I feel like that was your intention.
That was my intention. Yeah, that was the idea. I actually originally had a series of questions at the end just to kind of reiterate these are all the questions that I think are interesting and that we need to be thinking about. And we decided not to include them in the book. But the book is itself a series of questions, really. And it's more than anything, it's about challenging our intuitions and about that being an important piece of the scientific process. So do you want me to give a little overview of what the book is?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So it's about the science and philosophy of consciousness. And I really wanted there to be an accessible book on the topic. It's something that I have thought about my whole life. I've been basically obsessed with thinking about this topic. And then for the last 12 or so years, I've been working primarily with neuroscientists, but with scientists in general. And so I've learned more about the brain through my work with scientists. And I started actually writing to work through some of my own thoughts. It was really my own notes and they started probably 12 years ago. And actually around that time, I tried to get some other academics who I worked with to write a book like this, and I couldn't convince anyone to do it.
So you're like, I'll do it myself.
I didn't know that's how it would go. But after many, many years of thinking about it and reading and researching and interviewing scientists, I just felt like I needed to work through my own ideas. And it's such a complex topic that I just started writing my own notes and sharing it with friends. And a few of them suggested that I actually publish something. So I actually started writing a long article that I thought would go to, Scientific American or something like that. And the more I shared it with people, the more people started suggesting that I actually turn it into a book. So I'm not sure I ever would have taken on this project if I'd known what I was getting myself into. But yeah, so it is, I take the reader through what I think are some of the most interesting theories and research in consciousness studies. And it really focuses on what makes consciousness so mysterious and why it's continuing to dumbfound scientists and why it's so difficult for scientists to study. But it's really all of the work that I discuss is really in the context of challenging our intuitions about what consciousness is, and that being an important part of the project, especially when we're stuck on something. So this is true in every area of knowledge and scientific breakthrough. It seems that in order to understand something at a more fundamental level, to understand a more fundamental truth, it requires that we at the very least, challenge our intuitions. Often we have to completely let go of some intuitions that were totally misleading us. And I always like to give examples here because it sounds right, but people don't realize that this is basically true of every scientific breakthrough we've had, starting with understanding that the Earth is a sphere and not flat, as all of our senses lead us to believe.
Wait, is she breaking news here? The Earth is...
Some people still have a hard time wrestling with that intuition. To anything that happens on a significant time scale, evolution, the idea that I'm somehow related to fish or mushrooms
or banana, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That we share genes. I mean, these are counterintuitive facts. The germ theory of disease was something that took human beings a very long time to get their heads around.
It seemed mystical, and even now, without science, still seems mystical in a way.
Because we don't have intuitions for it, right? We can't see it, we can't feel it. We have no way with our everyday senses to perceive these microscopic organisms, and so something that's totally invisible to us makes us sick and can kill us. This is not something we have intuitions for. So I think when we're stuck in an area of knowledge or scientific, something that we're interested in studying scientifically, I think the first step, or one of the steps, has to be challenging our intuitions. And so I think we're at a point like that with consciousness right now.
That's what I really like about your book, is you do an excellent job of helping the reader let go of the intuitions, whether it's with scientific data or just the different lenses that you put in the book. Like you talked about if you and your friend could join brains, and like what would that consciousness look like. But just a simple thought experiment like that totally I think helps you let go of that intuition. So excellent work, excellent job.
Well, today we're going to talk about some different types of consciousness, I think, and because even that word is used to mean different things at different times.
We should
right?
probably define it. Actually, I made this mistake in another interview where I forgot to define it, and then
sometimes
realized at the end of the conversation it would have been helpful.
Sometimes people mean awareness, right? They just mean what do people mean, and then how do you define consciousness?
Consciousness has a wide range of definition. People use it to mean many different things, it makes it confusing. And I start with a definition in the book. What I'm talking about in the book, and usually what philosophers and scientists are referring to when we're talking about the most fundamental level of consciousness. So some people use the word consciousness to talk about self-awareness or thinking or complex thought. But what I'm talking about in the book, and what is in fact a mystery, is a much more fundamental, the basic sense of an experience. And I actually think experience is a better word. Awareness has multiple definitions too, and doesn't necessarily entail consciousness, and we can kind of go through those. But so consciousness, the way I use it in the book, I actually bring up the philosopher Thomas Nagel's description that he uses in his famous essay. You're both shaking your heads. I feel like you've read this essay. What is it like to be a bat?
Right.
And in that essay, he says, an organism is conscious if there's something that it's like to be that organism. For some people, they get that, and that has a strong meaning. For other people, they can't get their mind around that language, which makes sense to me because the language is not really precise.
Yeah.
It's more at kind of getting at a sense of experience. So
I'm definitely the latter. Like it took me reading that a couple times to really understand what that meant.
I think most people are in that camp for sure. Especially, it's not actually accurate language what it's like. So in the book and in conversation with people, I'll say, is there something that it's like to be you right now? And of course, you immediately, that conjures up the fact that you're having an experience. There's you're a collection of matter in the universe, and that matter is having an experience. Is there something that it's like to be that glass of water? And our answer is no. We imagine there's no experience there. And even if we're wrong,
right?
It doesn't actually matter. The point is, if you can distinguish between a collection of matter in the universe that doesn't have experience and one that does, that difference is consciousness. So at a very basic level, it doesn't necessarily entail thoughts or
I think
self-awareness, or it's just a pure experience.
Yeah, I think experience is a good word to kind of help define what we're talking about here.
Well, your book left me with a lot of questions, and we've got some questions from our audience today, so I think we'll start with those. Okay. Our first one is from Marco in Flagstaff.
How do you mentally minimalize how much you think? I guess you could say I'm kind of having an issue with just decluttering my thought process and thinking. And I've physically decluttered much of my things, but now a problem for me comes to mentally decluttering. And I just was asking if you guys had any methods or things that could help with that.
So Annaka, this question tends to come up a lot. It manifests differently, but we have cluttered minds, so whatever that means, right?
One of the most difficult parts of consciousness is when our brain is running amok. Yeah.
There's a David Foster Wallace story called Forever Overhead, and it's about a 13-year-old boy on his 13th birthday, and he is at a swimming pool going up to the high dive for the first time, and it's a beautiful story. But the whole story is about thinking and how he's trying to stop thinking and how that leads to more thinking.
Right.
And there's a line in there, I'm paraphrasing it, but you have decided that most fear comes from thinking. And I think it's so true. All of our sort of, well, I mean, of course, everything here has to do with thinking, but how do we compare that to consciousness? Because, and I think in a little bit we might dive into panpsychism, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that in here.
Yeah.
Not because I necessarily believe in it, but because you were totally open to it.
Yeah.
But
no,
let's talk.
I don't necessarily believe in it either. In the book, I say I'm 50-50 whether there's a brain-based explanation for consciousness or whether it actually goes deeper than that.
I think that's another one of the tools that you use to kind of help let go of those intuitions that we have. So panpsychism basically means everything is conscious. Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, it's
like
kind
this
of
microphone.
It's a category. Yeah. Well, sort of.
Okay.
I mean, to say that I think is misleading. But
okay,
it's panpsychism is a category of theories that describe consciousness as being a fundamental feature of the universe, and it ranges from theory to theory, whether that's at information processing or exists in some sort of field, the fluctuations of which give matter this intrinsic property of experience. Often. So one of the criticisms often is, and I have to always say, it sounds completely crazy. It sounded crazy to me for a very long time.
No,
and there were
it helps to preface
years
it a
where
little
I
bit,
just didn't really even look into it because it sounded
so out there.
Yeah, and it's the way
everything's connected, man.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of new age thinking that likes to adopt panpsychism to help support whatever pseudoscientific theory someone's come up with, and most often it's not something that can be applied to this any crazy ideas that I forget actually which jokes I used in my book, but I think one was if your neighbor thinks she can talk to her ficus or those types of things. Panpsychism does not actually make any of those claims and doesn't support those claims. The idea that the microphone is conscious, I mean, just to say to label an inanimate object and say it's conscious, we have to be very careful to distinguish consciousness from complex thought.
And that's where Marco is right now. We assume Marco has a brain in his head, right? and so I guess the two sides here. One's panpsychism. All matter has some sort of consciousness is the theory there, whether or not it's true.
Yes.
And then the other is that consciousness emanates from the brain.
Yes.
And so with Marco, it seems like he's really struggling with his thoughts. Now, of course, my first inclination is to say, well, have you ever meditated, right? But
it's like literally the first thing I had written down too.
Can we give him something concrete?
That's what we have.
It's cliche advice, but like cliches are cliche for a reason. But meditation totally does help quiet the mind. It helps you to deal with those thoughts because those thoughts are always going to enter your mind.
Yeah.
The question is like, how are you going to deal with those thoughts when they enter your mind?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So it does kind of paradoxically have the effect of quieting your mind, just becoming aware of the thoughts, usually, not always. But no, what meditation gives you is the ability to be with whatever is in your mind
I love that.
Without this struggle, without this conflict, without feeling like there's all this clutter, right? It's almost like the minimalist approach to clearing your thoughts is more just to let them be there. There's something simpler about letting them be there rather than
trying to block
wrestling
them out
with them.
Yeah,
I feel like we're so overstimulated right now as well. I often say when it comes to the physical goods, the easiest way to get rid of them is not bring them in the first place. And I think also, if you're someone like Marco or like most of us who deals with anxiety or we just have so many discrete bits of input that we're being barraged. It's drinking from the fire hose. And maybe the first thing to do is to turn the volume down externally as well. So we're exposing ourselves to, the thing that's vibrating in our pocket or the computer screen in front of us and the television. And sometimes we're doing all three at once. Yeah. And of course, that's going to lead to a cluttered mind. So I think that also reducing the number of inputs makes it a bit, I won't say easier, but simpler to sort of sit with those thoughts. Because no matter what, you can remove all the inputs, go do a 30-day retreat in a cave, you're still going to have the thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that really speaks to his question because from the beginning of humanity, when we had almost nothing, right? When we were the rumination and thoughts kind of pushing you around and causing uncomfortable psychological states is just, it's essentially the human condition. So
do you think language was sort of a precursor to that? And if before humans had language, maybe we had fewer anxiety producing thoughts?
Well, yeah, we definitely, yes. I think so. It's all brain processing, right? And then whatever, even in some crazy world where panpsychism is true, that doesn't actually change anything we already know, which is that this collection of matter, which is my brain, is processing and doing its thing, and that gives rise to the experience I'm having, right? That's why my experience is different from a cat's experience, or it's the processing. And so I think sometimes these types of questions get framed incorrectly. And the way I like to think about it, I think what's important to remember is it is all brain processing, and then how does that brain processing change or become influenced or get affected, because our brains are not these closed off systems. They're constantly interacting with the outside world through our senses, but also now that we have language through thoughts and communication. So you can affect a brain purely in a physical sense through medication or drugs or surgery or injury, any way in which the physical brain is manipulated will actually change your experience because the brain is changing. But thoughts and communication also change, and so we tend to think of those as if the end result is different, but the end result is the same. So if I looked freaked out and said, "Oh my God, someone just walked into the room with a gun," you would have a whole physiological response to that, right? That idea actually changes your brain and changes your physical being.
Yeah, even if it wasn't true, you just said it and I believed it, that would be enough to change my physiology.
Yeah, right. And so this is happening all the time. Thoughts that we're having ourselves, so the ideas that our own brain comes up with, there's like this feedback loop, right, where then affects the physical state of the brain. Other people's ideas affect the physical state of our brain, and then there's, genes and everything in the environment and everything else that's affecting it. But then the end result is what we're experiencing. And so when we're looking to change our experience, the question is always, what's the best way to change the state of my brain? And it can sometimes be through thoughts or through techniques of meditation, and it can be through
So maybe with
other
Marco,
ways.
it's like, how do you break that feedback loop? So, meditation would help.
Meditation would definitely.
I always say too, like, for me, it's always important to have a good therapist on hand because I can go and talk stuff out. Yeah. And I have, client privilege where, he can't repeat what I'm saying. Tony Soprano, totally made it okay for me to go see a therapist. I'm like, you know what? Like, he goes and has people deal with his shit. Like, I'm going to go and have someone deal with my shit. But even if it's not a therapist, it could be a friend that you're talking stuff through with. It could even be a book that you read to kind of help you gain a different perspective. So, Marco, there are many tools here that we've brought up. It is a matter of trying each tool out and seeing what works best for you. There isn't going to be a catch-all magic bullet answer, although I think meditation probably could be.
I just thought of No, I think that's the best answer for sure. Another one I just thought of though is that when we get into kind of repetitive thinking, or we can't really stop ourselves, we get kind of into these grooves of thought processes of anxiety or whatever it is. Just stopping that cycle for a moment actually makes a difference physiologically too. So
changing your state,
yeah, and that can be done. I mean, that's part of the reason why I love listening to podcasts now. It gives you a break from your own thought cycles. So listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook, reading a book, getting yourself engaged in something that just breaks the cycle for a minute can help you reset. And I actually think that's often for people who are really ruminating and getting stuck in anxious thoughts in particular, but other types of thinking like that, where you can get kind of caught up in a loop. Getting your mind focused on something else before you meditate, I actually think is very helpful.
That way during the meditation, you're not just ruminating about the problem.
Well, it'll come back.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
Excuse me. It'll come back, but it's an easier place to start from.
Yes, indeed.
Definitely.
Marco, I'm going to send you a copy of Annaka's book. It's called Conscious. Also, I'd love to send you a copy of our book, Essential. It's an essay collection with 150 essays in it, 12 different chapters about 12 different areas of intentional living. But one of those chapters is about mindfulness. So we'll send you both of those, a copy of Conscious and a copy of Essential. Sean, if you could reach out to Marco, I'd appreciate that. Send him the audiobook or the book or the ebook if he would prefer. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is? It is time for our lightning round where we answer questions from social media.
Indeed we do. So we're at The Minimalists on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. During the lightning round, Annaka, this is where we attempt to answer questions with short, shareable, less than 140 character responses.
Do I have to participate?
No.
Okay, good.
Well,
That would be very challenging for me.
what you'll do is you'll just like kind of give an answer, ramble on a little bit, and then Sean will make it nice and beautiful in post.
Yeah, he'll make it tweetable. He's the best editor I know, and we call these minimal maxims. We put the text of these minimal maxims in the show notes so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like, and you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place now, thanks to our good friend Jessica Lynn Williams, minimalmaxims.com.
All right, our first question is from Samir. Why does a spontaneous purchase of an expensive thing make you feel good? Now, I just want to give the caveat here that as being one of the minimalists, I still get that urge to buy stuff. And
You
when
hypocrite.
I know, right? and it's like, even when I do make, well, I guess, kind of staving off those impulses, when I actually do make a purchase, it makes it, a little bit more meaningful. But I still get that dopamine hit. It's like, I don't think there's this magic bullet answer that's going to like make people stop wanting to buy. But yeah, it certainly is. It can be addicting for sure.
Well, my pithy answer is, and we can unpack this a bit, a fairy tale well told doesn't make it more true. And I'm looking at Samir's question here, and it's like, does it make you feel good? Maybe in the moment. I think what Samir's doing is confusing pleasure with contentment in a way, and you get the dopamine rush. You get the checkout line high, so to speak, but that doesn't last far past the checkout line. It doesn't bring you real joy or contentment. As a minimalist, everything I own serves a purpose or brings me joy, I like to say. But very few things actually bring me joy.
Josh is allergic to joy.
No, I find the things that bring me joy rarely are things. Ooh, you could tweet that podcast, Sean. But there has to be a process in the brain, right? There's some dopamine being released here.
Well, and people are different too. So I was thinking about this. Sorry, I should. Sorry. I was thinking about this watching your documentary because I relate to a lot of it, and in many ways, I am a minimalist, and I just that's how I've always been. But you would laugh if you saw my closet after hearing that statement. But I think for sure, many more things bring me joy than bring you joy, right? So not everyone is the same, just at a base level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, I mean, I think that distinction is important. But I think what you said is absolutely true. That it gives you kind of a high in the moment, and I think there's an evolutionary reason for it too. We're needing to collect things. We evolved to live in a very different world from the world we live in.
Yeah.
But we're still clinging. Well, our brain still clings to those imperatives, so to speak. Like the need to hoard was actually a useful one at one point in time, and now it just sort of gets in the way of living a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, I wish there was like this list of 100 things. I could be like, Annaka, here's the 100 different pieces of material items you need, and this is you're gonna live a very happy, perfect life. And no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's Josh and I stressed that a lot about how what we talk about is what we do, and even him and I, differ in opinion on some things, believe it or not. But all right, so my pithy answer, very similar to what I was talking about earlier with the dopamine. Don't go chasing dopamine. Ephemeral pleasures are easy and addictive. So,
do you think Sean's gonna like insert the TLC song? Don't go chasing waterfalls.
I took everything I had to not be like, don't go chase. All right. Our next question is from Drew. Do you consider obsession over a person, place, or thing to be a byproduct of a diagnosable disorder, or is obsession just a state of mind?
Well, I have OCD, and so I guess that's a diagnosable disorder. I learned from your book that it's probably because I touched cat shit when I was a kid.
I know, it's unbelievable, like the stuff that you bring up. How
toxoplasmosis, I believe.
Yeah,
totally
although I don't
change your
think
personality.
It contributes specifically to OCD.
Okay.
Oh yes. Oh no, that's strep. The strep bacteria in young children
can
cause severe OCD when the body has this strange response to it.
So in Annaka's book, she talks about a couple different germs or bacteria that can totally affect your consciousness, affect who you are, what your impulses are. I mean, there's a well, I guess this doesn't really change your consciousness, but did you hear about the mosquito or something that makes you, or the tick that makes you allergic to meat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Some deer tick that's in Texas, I believe.
But no, I go into all this detail about parasites, which is the most fascinating stuff, where it just completely takes over certain behaviors of the host. And so they have drives and desires that they didn't have before that are totally based on the parasite's needs.
Oh my goodness.
Toxoplasmosis is the one that makes rats run toward cats.
Yeah.
And it's changing their brain. And I think the same is true. I mean, for Drew's question here, my pithy answer is simple. It's labels are incomplete and limiting, but necessary. And so I label this thing a microphone, right? That's necessary. We have language. That's a label, right? But it's also when we label something like you have obsessive compulsive disorder, it becomes this limiting diagnosis that is disempowering in a way. And so when a doctor told me when I was in my early 20s that I have OCD, it's like, well, I have this diagnosis, but what does that mean? Oh, well, now it just means I'm trapped for the rest of my life?
Well, especially for something like that. I mean, there's a range, and it's not really a specific thing in the way that they label it as. And I tend to be OCD, and I have actually been diagnosed with it, but I'm sure that I'm on that spectrum somewhere. And I remember talking to someone about it at some point. I was asking, I was just curious. I was asking someone questions about psychiatry and the brain and all these types of things. And he said most successful people are on the OCD spectrum. And so a lot of these things that are diagnosable in some lesser form are actually extremely useful. And I'm sure you have noticed all the ways in which it's helped you in your life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's made me care about things, and attention to detail has been amplified. And
and it could be the other way around. These are all like descriptions of your personality and the way your brain works, and in combination with the things you've been through in your life. And I think OCD is not the most helpful way to describe all of these different. But that is, it's definitely, again, I would go back to kind of looking at the brain as a system, and how if you're uncomfortable, right? If you're experiencing the types of things people experience with OCD in a very extreme way, this can totally limit your life. It can be debilitating. It can be it can make you very unhappy. So the question is, what's the best way to change the state of your brain? And there are different responses to that, and meditation is one and medication is another, and they're both valid, and it varies from person to person. But I think it's good for someone to recognize that they're suffering in that way, if they're suffering, so that they can make a change.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that kind of leads into my pithy answer, which is extremes can be a detriment. So, with Josh's OCD, for example, it could be a detriment if he let it go to the extreme, but he has tools and different things that he uses to, like you said, Annaka, to use it kind of as this secret power that really helps Josh with his life. But, anything that we obsess over, if we get to that terminus of obsession, I think when you get to that terminus, it will always be a detriment. So when it comes to obsession, it's really about deciding what is the balance, and then once you can kind of see where the balance is, how do you get there?
A healthy level of obsession has helped me do some really powerful things, like writing a book. I don't think you can write a book without a healthy level of obsession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sure you stayed obsessed about this, especially to get it as pithy.
That's 15 years of my obsession.
Right. But it's also not infinite jest in the sense of its length. You could, that's like a phone book, but this is this is distilling it down into, again, like I said, I walked away with a bunch of questions, but those questions I think were helpful. It wasn't just why didn't she answer? I mean, again, part of my OCD would be I want the answers to consciousness. She didn't tell me exactly what it is.
Well, I want the answers too, but I think the only way we're going to get there is to ask more questions. But ultimately I feel the same way. I just want to know, which is why I can't stop thinking about it, I think.
And it would be disingenuous for you to posit here is the explanation, right? Many people have tried to do that, right? And what I like about it is you present some different points of view, and you bring them forward in a way where they can battle with each other, or they might battle each other in my own mind. Mm-hmm. And I think we walk away with a better understanding, but in a weird way, a less complete understanding.
Yeah,
but that's sort of the purpose.
Also, I mean, once I realized I was writing this for the general public, the main reason I wanted to write it initially was because we actually get a lot of joy, and we enjoy the experience of feeling awe and encountering things that we can wonder about. And there's actually a lot of research on this now, actually, and it increases our well-being to have things that inspire awe. And most people are immediately interested when they hear there's new information about black holes, or about the beginnings of the universe, or about everything that comes out of quantum physics. It's all just perplexing and incredible, and we like to think about it. It's fun to think about, and there are endless documentaries and books. And for me, consciousness fits in with those great mysteries, for sure. And so I really just wanted, as much as I want to actually understand it, and it's true with all these things, I want to understand, is there a beginning to the universe? And these things, like infinity, I was actually just talking about this. There's a great children's book called Infinity and Me, and it's just about wrestling with this idea that we can't actually get our minds around it, right? Something that goes on forever, we can't imagine it, but if we can't imagine an end either, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think these things actually bring us joy, and I think many people don't realize how mysterious consciousness is, and how confused.
I really didn't. I mean, I knew it was something I didn't have a grasp on, but now I sort of understand why I don't.
Yeah, no, and so it's like a great mystery that we can all think about and contemplate and be awestruck by.
Yeah, and appreciate.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right, looks like we have a bunch more surprise questions this week. How do I halt my mind's obsession with purging stuff? How has your study of consciousness affected your worldview and priorities in life? That should be an interesting one. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? Also, Annaka is going to explain to us why free will doesn't exist and why that's okay, and much, much more. And if there's time, let's discuss meditation for kids. My daughter just turned 6. You have a mindful games, which we'll talk about. I haven't played that with Ella yet, but I have read you have a children's book called I Wonder.
Yeah.
And we're going to, we can talk about that a little bit too. And if you want to hear all that, you can listen to this week's Maximal episode, available exclusively on Patreon. That's right, you're currently listening to our weekly Minimal episode, but each week, Ryan and I, and Annaka this week, we record a much longer Maximal episode on the Minimalists private podcast, which gives us the private space we need to talk about a bunch of stuff we don't talk about in public. This week we talked about ketamine and much more. Anyway, Patreon is also the best way for us to fund this podcast. Keep it 100% advertisement free. So thank you to our Patreon supporters. When you subscribe to our Minimalists podcast, the private podcast on Patreon, you'll also receive a personal link so that our maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You can find all the details and all the good stuff, including an additional private podcast episode every week over at theminimalists.com/support. It's also worth noting that we're capping our Patreon supporters at 6,000 supporters. So we're more than halfway there now, and we've more than doubled in the last few months. So if you're interested, now is a good time to get on board and listen to the private podcast that we do every week. Ryan, what else you got for us?
Being informed is more important than ever. As always, I want to encourage people to read more and get informed.
That reminds me of this cartoon, Ryan.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's from the New Yorker. Mm-hmm. It's two guys seated at a dinner table together, and of course they're just talking about whatever, and the guy says, "And don't even get me started on topics I even know less about."
That's how I feel. That's how I felt today about talking about consciousness. It was a fun conversation, though. All right, man. Hey, I've got some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hi Minimalists, this is Katie from Anglesey in Wales in the UK, and I just wanted to share a resource that's helping me use Instagram in a more minimalist and deliberate way. It's called Filtergram, and the website is filtergram.app. And the way it works is you add people that you want to follow by their Instagram usernames, and then it shows your feed on Filtergram in chronological order, with no comments other than the initial caption and hashtags, and crucially, no advertisements. It's read only, but if you do want to interact with a post, you can easily open it on Instagram with one click. You can also add keyword filters, so you just display certain content from the people that you follow. For example, if you only want to see posts from a specific user that mention minimalism. It's web-based, so there's nothing to install on your computer or your phone, and you also don't even need an Instagram account to use it. So I hope this is useful for people who like Instagram and want to connect with people, but want to do so in a bit more of a deliberate way.
This is Chantel from Anchorage, Alaska. I have a tip for listeners who are on their journey towards becoming minimalists with their belongings, but struggle with guilt from getting rid of items. Whether it's guilt from the wasted money spent or the emotional attachment to items you are ready to part with, it can sometimes be difficult to just dump certain items into a box and donate them to a thrift store without seeing them appreciated by somebody else. Instead, check out your community's Facebook groups such as Pay It Forward or Buy Nothing, which allows you to post an item online and people in your community can respond to claim the item. Then you meet up to hand the item off. It requires a little more time investment, but that allows you to contribute to someone who may be in need and to see that the item will truly be valued by another person and put to good use, rather than sorted through by a for-profit thrift store, and you never know if it's actually going to make it to someone else's hands. It helps to reduce waste and consumerism and makes you feel like you're contributing, while also helping you clear your own space of things you no longer use. I've been a member of both Pay It Forward and Buy Nothing for years, and it's been very useful to get rid of things and also acquire things that I know will be put to good use without going out and spending money.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Annaka Harris for joining us today. You can check her out at annakaharris.com. Check out her new book. It's called Conscious. You can get that wherever books are sold. Also, she has a great kids book that I read to Ella all the time. It's called I Wonder. I'll hold this up for the YouTube audience here. And I haven't played these with Ella yet, but I'm going to. Mindful Games activity cards, which she co-produced with Susan Kaiser Greenland. So you can check those out. We'll put a link to those in the show notes as well. Oh, and real quick, for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. Jordan, will you hand me one of those coffee bags? I just gave one to Annaka on her way out. But Ryan and I opened a coffee shop. He gave me the pretty purple one. We opened a coffee shop a few years ago. We just started roasting coffee a couple of years ago, and now it's available to the public for the first time very recently. And if you're interested, we do this thing called the Minimalist Choice. It's what Ryan and I are drinking currently. This isn't the actual one, but that's going on right now. But if you just go to theminimalists.coffee, not .com, you can go to theminimalists.com. That'll take you to our website. But if you want to go to our coffee, it's theminimalists.coffee. is the extension there. And you can find out what we're drinking right now. You can order it yourself so you don't actually have to go to St. Petersburg, Florida anymore in order to drink our favorite coffee. I'm really proud of this new packaging too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
They did such a great job on
the attention to detail that those guys give at Bandit is just, it's incredible, man. From the packaging to the amazing freaking coffee that they're producing right now.
Amen. So check that out, theminimalists.coffee. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839, or send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. If you want our show notes in your inbox, you can sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. You'll also receive our Simple Sunday emails each week. For our added value this week, let's listen to a song that sounds like consciousness to me. Ryan, you know Jonesy from Sigur Rós?
I mean, I know Sigur Rós.
Yeah, so Jonesy is the lead singer, and he has an album with his partner Alex, and the group is just called Jonesy and Alex, and the album is called Rice Boy Sleeps, I believe. Rice Boy Sleeps. And this song is called Happiness. It's from Jonesy and Alex's 2009 album, Rice Boy Sleeps. And to me, it sort of sounds like what I imagine consciousness sounds like. If you were to I want to make a musical score for consciousness, it's this album. And especially this song.
That's great.
If you leave here today with just one message, y'all, we hope it's this. Love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.